Okay, cool. I think that's half of the people. Uh,
Never mind,
yeah,
never mind.
let's just
Hmm,
yeah, let's just start.
appreciate it.
First of all, thanks everyone for joining in. Welcome for our webinars on fraud preventions. I'm Brian. I'll be your moderator today. So I'm the founder of Socratech, and also I used to be a machine learning engineer in Go Cutlass, Shopee, and Ovo, building credit scoring and fraud. So today we'll have a very high overview on quite a relaxed discussions about fraud, like what's a common type of fraud, and how could we actually prevent fraud. So we have two very expert in the industry, um, Pak Bramantio and Pak Aditya. Maybe you guys can do a self-introductions about your background and how do you get into fraud space and what are you doing right now?
Sure,
Yeah, maybe
probably.
Bramantio. Yeah,
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I can go first. My name is Bram. Just like the author of Dracula, Bram Stoker. But obviously taking a more Indonesian route with the name. Um, yeah, I've been in the fraud risk space, I think, for the past 8 years or so. Been building some of like notable risk platform for a few big names in Indonesia, including Kredivo, Gojek, um, Spenmo, Flip, and now I'm the chief product and risk officer at Astra Lab in Indonesia. Yeah,
that's fascinating. Adit, do you want to do a quick introduction as well?
Hello, guys. My name is Aditya Nandautama. You can call me Adit. I've been product manager for RIS for like 4 to 5 years now. Previously, I worked for Gojek, Goto, and Avisory, but currently I'm work for Careem, which is like Uber owned, like ride hailing and super app concept in Dubai, UAE. Nice to meet you all.
Great. Okay, cool. Let's dive right into it. I think we'll just start with maybe start from Bram. Can you give us a quick overview of like what is the most common type of fraud of any digital companies or digital product could face today?
yeah, sure. I think we can kind of like segregate fraud into kind of like a B2C, B2B kind of like scenario with consumer products, right? With B2C scenarios, usually, um, as we all know, new startups need lots of users. So most of like the investment are into customer acquisition. Most fraudsters tend to kind of like abuse those promos to gain leverage on the platform. I think that's kind of like the biggest fraud scenario that we can encounter within the B2C space, especially like during the Gojek early days, right? Like GoFood was burning like what $90,000 a day back then when we're acquiring new users. With B2B platform, it's a bit different because like most of
Mhm.
like the fraud kind of like scenario usually tends to kind of like more on misuse of account. So for example, like if you're operating a disbursement platform, for example, where you manage money in and money out, usually for for small medium enterprises, why they want to when they want to save money, they only acquire one seat on those type of platforms, and then they exchange passwords from one user to another. So sometimes, like when there's internal fraud that's happening, you don't know who is to blame because you're exchanging passwords, right? So I mean, like
Okay.
I think those kind of like scenarios are pretty common nowadays. Yeah.
Mhm. So it sounds like you mentioned the B2C and the B2B kind of type of different, and both of the companies I assume have very different type of way of doing things, right? B2C tends to have high applications, which is what you mentioned, have the promo abuse. So that's really interesting. I wonder what Aditya thinks. Like, you think that is there like in your experience in the B2B in the B2C space, what is the most common type we've seen? Is it also promo abuse or any different type of fraud?
Yeah, thank you. So I like to separate it between internal fraud and external fraud. So for internal fraud means the bad actor is within the company itself. It can be misuse of data, and it can be also for monetary like impact, right? Misuse of data is just like you got the PII data on the user, you use it for your own benefit, something like that. Monetary can be like conflict of interest, and also can be like some scheme, like fraud scheme that the employee or someone within the company do it for the monetary benefit. That's the internal fraud. And external is coming from the bad actor that outside the organization. And on this, I'd like to categorize on three different buckets, which is the identity, which is like the gate, entry gate, payment, which is the end gate, and abusing somewhere in between. While abusing, it's a gray area because some company or some organization think that it is fraud. So that's why some fraud team handle that. But some company, no, it's more like it's not fraud per se, but just like marketing on ops loopholes, something like that. So yeah, that's it. So identity, abusing, and payment for external.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. I think like Bram also touched upon it, like when he mentions that there's this huge internal fraud, and there's another external fraud which is related to identity and payments, and sometimes promo abuse. So it feels like it's hard to do an online business because there's so many frauds happening. I'm not sure, like, is it just because it's very common in Southeast Asia or not? And Ditya touched upon a very interesting insight. A lot of business people are like when they start their business, they think that fraud is cost of doing business. It almost feels like, okay, this is just a marketing cost. So I was wondering, like, what is the like the way that business persons should change their perspective? Is it the right thing to say that cost of doing business? Like, should people always assume fraud as cost of doing business, or there are a better way to solve this? And do you want to start with that? Maybe Bram, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, like in the early stages of like startups, right, or any kind of like company, usually you'll do anything for growth, especially growing your revenue, right? And sometimes injecting money into growing the business is one of many choices that any founders or any um, executives have. Uh, but in my opinion, when you are aiming for that sustainability, right, it's safe to say that the mindset needs to be there that, hey, sometimes when you're spending money, it doesn't necessarily translate into conversion, or probably you're spending money in the wrong pockets, for example.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I mean, like it's kind of like a matter of perspective. But when a company recognizes any kind of like loopholes or leaks that they have, usually that's when they start to have this mindset. Oh yeah, probably I need to invest in risk or fraud mitigation strategies or people, right? So I think in a way, at the start it might be okay if you have loads of runway, but further down the road, you obviously need to make sure that your business is still sustainable, and making sure that your funds are allocated or spent in the right way.
Yeah, that. I think I cannot agree more with that. But Adit, do you want to add more about this?
Yeah, I agree with what Mas Bram said. In the early days, you only looking at, you need to laser focus on growth, how you can get the, traction and so on. But in my experience, people start looking or start take attention on fraud because of two things. The first one is they start looking at the PNL and they start seeing that what is this? This doesn't make sense. Why we make a lot of revenue but we are not profiting or we're losing? Okay, there is a cost on this. Where does the cost come from, so on and so on? And then after they break it down, maybe they found that, oh, the promo is getting abused or not efficient, or oh, there is some chargeback that happening, um do some due to some credit card transaction or something like that. That's the first like point. The second one is on the reputational. So and this is more like in Indonesia, I think fraud is something that when it's doing a good job, then no one doesn't really care or doesn't really know. But if there is any accident, then people will, like really take attention on. For example, the stolen PII data from some startup or anything. It could be anything like someone misuse your account to buy something like that. It will cause a huge uproar on social media. People will, start looking at you and something like that. So I think those 2 points is when the breaking point, when people, especially startup founder, start to pay attention to
Mm,
fraud and how to
mm,
prevent it. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, it's very interesting. So I was wondering, like, if that's the case, right? Because in every stages of the company, you might different kind of approach. So how does the approach for fraud preventions as company grow? Like, for example, what work for company at small company, like a small startup, medium size, and enterprise. So what need to be done in these three stages? Could you maybe give a more opinion and talk about that? Bram, did you want to start?
Yeah, it kind of like depends though. I mean, like, if you're a very tech heavy company, like for example, if you're a payment gateway or um, a lending fintech, for example, then most of like the time you can find early symptoms of fraud just by the crunching numbers. So, for example, like if you're a lending fintech, you gather data on first payment defaults and see any kind of like pattern emerging from there, right? So it's quite easy in a way, but tricky if you don't have enough data on the things that you need to look at actually. So for example, like if you don't capture location data, then you won't be able to pinpoint where do the frauds are happening. Is it from a particular area or is it spread out across the region, for example? But going into a very operational heavy company, for example, like let's say like Gojek lah, because there's so many touch point. Um, Considering there are very various moving parts like the users, the drivers, the merchants. So all those things kind of like add up operationability wise, and you kind of like need to pinpoint where the fraud is happening. For example, like is it collusion between the merchants and the drivers, for example, or is it collusion between merchants and the users? Um, how do they transact? For example, are they focusing on credit cards or are they abusing GoPay because there are lots of promos if they're using GoPay? And if you add, pay laters into the mix, then it comes as like kind of like frauds with fintechs trying to cash out as much of credit limit as possible into certain merchants, and then they'll put layerings on top of it and cash out the money from those merchants, because merchant accounts can actually cash out lots of money, like hundreds of millions or not even billions of rupiah, right? So I think it depends on kind of like the view, on whether or not you're a tech reliant company or an operationability reliant company. In terms of like small, medium, or enterprise size, I think the most difference is the amount of money they're injecting into fraud mitigation or risk mitigation strategies. So, for example, like in small companies, usually you rely on hard-coded rules embedded within your system. But once you grow to medium size, then you'll onboard new tools, procure more, third-party data like device intelligence and so on. When you go into enterprise, that's when you invest heavily into people, SOPs, certifications, certainly, and obviously internal audit and also third-party audits. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, sounds like data plays such an important role in fraud preventions. And even for small companies, that means that, okay, you just very simple if else rule in the code. So for medium size, that's when you kind of like invest in more sophisticated tool with much more alternative data. And when you go enterprise, whatever data you can get, or more enterprise software for that part. Adit, do you want to add one more into that?
Yeah, I want to re-emphasize on the data part because I think in the beginning, fraud is always a reactive action, right? Instead of like proactive. You go from reactive and then proactive. That's what Mas Bram said, that you add this kind of intelligence and so on to be more proactive. But the beginning is always reactive, and with reactive action, you need a good data, as much data as possible, as good as possible. So even if you're not taking care of it for now, make sure that you have a good data. A good data doesn't mean that it's need to be like in some database and so on and so on. Even if it's manual, it's okay, but you keep it. You make some kind of format or method to collect the data and make sure that it's good. Because when you first start actioning on that, you will need that. You will looking backward on what's happening, what is the loopholes and so on and so on, and based on that. So cannot re-emphasize enough on the data part that you need to provide.
Okay, cool. I think if data play important roles, I guess the analysts as well. But what are the most like? I think some from the audience also ask the questions like, what kind of tools that companies are using, right? Is it heavily relies on engineers to implement it, or is it more like, is there any kind of tools that we can do plug and play for those companies to prevent fraud? Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, probably Edit can answer because like he works at Karim, right? It's a big company.
Yeah. And I know I think Goto is bigger than some part, but yeah, this is where my roles come. I'm the product manager, especially for the risk area. So it's always build versus buy kind of things, especially in a big company, because we care about the cost and benefits of it. So and this is going back to the category that I shared earlier, which is the identity, payment, and abusing. I will use that. So for identities, like Mas Bram said, usually device intelligence is the the standard way. So you need if you are talking, sorry, this is talking about like digital product, a digital company or digital product. Maybe in the like offline kind of things might be different. So in the digital area, so device intelligence is one thing, because that's where the fraudster, external fraudster in this case, is entering, creating fake account, using account takeover, and so on and so on. So you need a good device identification, and you can build it yourself, or you can use the available product from vendor. There is a like many vendor that will provide you. And yeah, that's the thing on the identity. For the payment, if you're using like third-party payment processor, payment gateway, and so on, they will have their own fraud prevention mechanism in place. So I think if you're still using like external party, you can work with them because they already have the capability. If you build it yourself, Karim built. We built our own. We work with many gateway and processor, but we also build our own system. So we also build the fraud prevention mechanism on that part. So yeah, that's the thing. And for abusing, it's always depends on the kind of like abusing itself. For example, and it will relate to those two. For example, the promo abuse, it will relate to the device kind of thing, because you will need to see which user like use too many promo, and if this user share the same device with another user who also use too many promos, so you can block, for example, you can block the device, something like that. So I think that's the cover. If there is any follow-up question, feel free.
For all this audience that are not familiar with device intelligence, so device intelligence basically means that you can get a lot of information about the device, whether have Android, emulated, is it VPN or not, or even sometimes GPS spoof or not. So those kind of device intelligence, you can actually use it to prevent fraud. So if someone is using emulated device, it's most likely to be fraud. So yeah, I think that usually very useful. But in your experience, like I imagine that it takes times, right, to build those device intelligence. So just been wondering, like if they would, if someone right now, there's okay, I don't have any fraud prevention system, I want to prevent identity. Like how long does it take, and then how effective it is? Just device intelligence. Just to dive deep into device intelligence part. Do you want to add more, Nadia?
Yeah, probably I can answer that because like I've been using device intelligence for quite a while. So one story that I like to share is when I started my tenure at Gojek back in 2019. The issue was all about signups because like Gojek was acquiring like probably 150,000 signups a day. And the thing is, like with those signups comes promo abuse because we have to have like onboarding promos, right? And Gojek cannot sustain it all. I mean, like yes, they do have the money, like they were injected like billions of dollars, but it wasn't sustainable in a way. And one particular use case with device intelligence is to see whether, like the most simplest form, is to see whether your or the user's phone number is legit or not. So whether it's a real mobile number or it's a landline or it's a voice over IP number or it's a, how do I say it, a disposable number. So like burner phones use these disposable numbers. So just with those, like that one tool, like I helped save Gojek like $600,000 a month in promo views back then, because we decided like, hey, we're gonna not allow voice over IP phones, any landlines, any disposable phone numbers, burner phones. So those alone impacted like probably 10 to 15% of the user signups on a daily basis, but that saved the company like $600,000 in promo or campaign worth of funds. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds like a very huge impact to the company, right? So let's just dive into a little bit more. Like if I think Aditya also mentions that, so there's a device intelligence. If it's payment, you will be working to the payment gateway for detection system, and promo abuse somewhere related to device. But what are the most common challenges you see when people try to develop a fraud detection system or a fraud prevention system in the business, and how can companies or business overcome those kind of challenges?
From experience wise, I think it's on whether or not you need to build a real-time engine or not, actually, because
Okay.
it depends on your business. For example, like if you're a lending fintech, you don't really see much real-time data anyways, because like people are not transacting like, for example, a million loans in a second. There's no such thing as a lending fintech that does that, right? But if you're talking about transactional like payments, like with Chris, for example, you will encounter like millions of transactions a second. So building the right tech stack for your fraud prevention tools is actually the first key part in that. I mean, like whether or not you're going to use Kafka or are you going to use just a batch engine, for example. So those kind of like the early on decisions can kind of like help you in actually finding the correct approach and actually mitigating fraud. Probably Adit has another opinion on this.
Hmm. Not really. I think, yeah. I think that's overall.
Yeah, I see. So it all depends the nature of the business, whether they need to real times or not. So if I guess if you want to do a real time fraud detection system, it is much more expensive or difficult. It requires engineers to build it. And if you do it with batch, you might can skip all the engineering part and try to like do it with via analyst way. Maybe every day in a daily basis,
Mm.
you'll try to see okay which one is most likely to be fraud, most likely to be not fraud. So maybe the next question is like, let's say we have a fraud prevention system in place, right? Something maybe you can block 5% or sometimes 10%. But the thing is that the business people will always say that I want more growth. So don't try to block my customers, right? So how would you balance the robust of the fraud prevention system with need to ensure a smooth user experience? Is there any trade-off or how would you manage it? Yeah, feel free to jump in.
S-
You gotta go
Okay.
first. Then.
Yeah. So the question is because a fraud in this, for example, like a transaction that is fraud is also considered as a revenue, right?
Mhm.
Even though that you lose the money, but you will still record it as revenue. So uh and that's the business need, right? And so how to balance that with the fraud prevention as well as not compromise the user experience, right? That's what I get from the question. um yeah, it's always so basically, like I said earlier, fraud is not necessarily you know, for the business people. If you are looking, for example, if your target is revenue, then if there is any fraud, then you don't really care so much, right? But then if your target is profitability, for example, or sustainability, then it's another story. So and this will need, um in my case, in my experience, this will need like consolidation in the higher ups. What needs to be prioritized? If we prioritize growth, then maybe we can relax some control. If we are prioritizing, for example, we have too much losses, we need to prioritize on the sustainability, profitability, then maybe we will tighten up our control. So it's always comes to the priority on the company itself. So it's not cannot be like a only one thing. And on the experience part, and that is where the roles of, in my opinion, that is where the role of product manager in a risk team is. So we're not only looking at how to prevent it, but how to not compromise the user experience, and even how to create the user experience that's really at the same time make it easier for them and prevent fraud as well. And and we're still looking. Is the same product manager works, starting from opportunity or problem, see what is the objective, and decide on the flow. And also we're also looking at the false positive, because on the fraud team, false positive means that you disturb like legitimate user experience. These users should not be punished, but you punish them. So we need to also looking constantly on the false positive. I'll give you one example where we try to design the flow while at the same time prevent fraud. So we have in UAE, it's credit card or debit card heavily. It's not like Indonesia where it's heavy on cash, like digital money, like GoPay, Shopee Pay, and something. So we heavy on card. So people here need to add some card in the system, right? So we creating this card scan, so you can scan your card. It will help them because it's easier. Instead of like typing the numbers and so on, you just scan, and then your data is there. You can transact. But in our side, it's also good because we trust that the user have the card, so it's not going to be like card not present kind of situation. User have the card, and they also have the CVV, because in the card there is a CVV, so we can get the CVV. And we can also, in this case, if we add another layer, which is send the 3DS authentication. So if they are 3DS authentication, it will also help us for the chargeback that can happen. So it's one of the things that how if we put a risk perspective on the product development, at the same time we make it easier for them. At the same time we make it good for the fraud prevention. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Rob, do you want to add one more before?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, I noticed there's this question on like how to kind of like incentivize product team to prevent fraud, right? I think it's good to have like a P&L mentality as a product manager. So, for example, like if you're in charge of a particular product, let's say you're a product at GoFood, for example, it's good to have your revenue grow, right? But if at the same time your cost of chargebacks, your cost of or probably not GoFood lah. Let's say GoSend lah, because GoSend partners with lots of e-commerce, right? Let's say your revenue grows, but your chargebacks or your liability damages because there are stolen items, stolen goods happening during transit, right? If those also grows, then that means like you will need to start looking at your OKR differently, your metrics differently, because then if you have that P&L mentality or metrics based on your P&L, that means like you will have two sets of North Star actually. One is to grow your revenue while maintaining your costs, right? So I mean, like in terms of like a typical fraud team KPI or OKR, usually it's more of like how can the business grow exponentially while you're keeping those fraudulent stuff at bay. One example that I had when I was at Flip, for example, right, was the amount of, let's say, scammers that are escalated by our users. Let's say for an arbitrary number, it was like 10, for example, per week. Can we reduce those escalations to like 5 or 3, for example? Like that's a 70% reduction, right? While not impacting the business in terms of like revenue. So how do we ensure that happens? For example, let's say we put in awareness banners whenever they want to transact, or for example, if there's a new device change, let's say you just bought a new phone, and then you move all your apps to your new phone, right? Obviously, that's a new device login. We prevent credential changes, like you cannot change your password, change your PIN if you just change your device. And then we challenge you for your PIN or sometimes biometrics if we notice anything suspicious happening with your device or your account. So those kind of like putting into friction makes sure that, oh yeah, we're actually authorizing transactions from the legit users, and henceforth, reducing the number of fraud escalations to our customer service team. But in the same time, making sure that the user experience was not hindered, and we only put frictions only at certain points where we are absolutely sure that there's a suspicious thing going on. So I think that's kind of like a typical fraud metric that's usually employed by tech companies.
Mm. I see. Sounds like measurement is really important, play a very crucial role. In order for you to balance between fraud preventions and user experience, you have to measure it first and making sure that you are not hindering your growth, but also try to prevent fraud. That is really insightful. Into the next following part, everyone's talking about Gen AI and machine learnings and those fancy stuff. Like, it's just based on your experience. Like, when should company actually use AI or machine learning for fraud detections? And can you share any practical example? Anyone want to start with Brahm or Adit? Feel free.
Yeah, sure, I could go first. I mean, like
Yeah.
with AI, the thing is, like frankly speaking, I don't really have that many touch points with the AI as of yet. But with machine learning, I think it's very beneficial in a way because, like, when you build models that kind of like defines the risk, the risk level of users whenever they are in the user journey of your platform or your product, that's beneficial. So, for example, like there was this one case in Singapore, that involves Payla. So, for those of you that are not familiar with Payla, Payla is kind of like a GoPay or OVO that was made by DBS, the bank, and essentially they integrate with probably most of like the big merchants there. Um, let's say like one of them is CDG. So CDG is kind of like the Indonesian equivalent of Bluebird. So it's a taxi company. One issue that they encounter with Payla back in the early days of like fintech, right, is that Payla directly debits from your debit card. So or any credit card. But the thing is, like, whenever a fraudulent user comes in, for example, and then they get into the taxi, then they unlink their credit card or debit card from the Payla app. So essentially, there's no hold value when they're on the ride. So you get your ride for free. And by kind of like getting into information on kind of like the user journey when you're actually um, whether or not you're riding in the taxi. So that involves like getting accelerometer data, your GPS data, your gyroscope data. So when you're employing a machine learning model and you can be absolutely sure that, hey, this type of behavior is actually a user riding in a taxi, for example. And it shows you like a very accurate. So accurate here is a bit um, arbitrary, but I would say like 87% up is already accurate enough. Um, and in this case, whenever a user does that type of fraud, and then the Paylah guys, they actually know like, hey, we actually know that you're sitting in the taxi, for example, because of those machine learning models. Calculate the probability of you actually being in the taxi versus, you're somewhere else, for example. So in that way, like they still charge the latest debit or credit card that was used during that transaction, even though it was unlinked. So that's kind of like a good way to kind of like prevent chargeback fraud, for example. Uh, yeah, probably there's another use case by Adit on AI or machine learning.
Mm. I will add another point of view on the machine learning part. Yes, we are using a lot of machine learning models here in Karim and back then in Gojek as well. But the thing with the machine learning, so uh, how machine learning work is like they take a lot of data, structured, unstructured, and then they come with some result, right? Usually in risk or fraud prevention, they do it for example, trigger it or for risk scoring, like trust score, something like that, right? And usually the feedback loop was some of this result is getting checked manually by the ops. In Gojek, we have like ops team here in Karim as well, and then it feedbacks to the model itself. Okay, so it's like a feedback loop. But another point of view, why we some people doesn't like the model is because they don't know what happened inside this model. So it's like a black box. And if you, for example, you try to relax or you try to tighten the control, you cannot do it like fastly and straightforward. So, for example, like you open new market and there is a thing called cold start, which is in the new market. You know, the traction is not. We need to catch up with the traction, so we will decrease some control or relax some control. With model, you cannot do it like straightforwardly, but with rules, with as SQL rules or whatever, you can do it like you just turn it off or you just change the parameter and you can do it, and then you can change it. So that's another perspective of the model, but it also gives you benefit. For example, you will with those feedback loop and with those arbitrarily data, random data and something, you can decide on something, giving the score and so on. That's what I want to add for machine learning model. For AI, it's still developing, evolving. It's also one of the hot topic, if you open, because I follow some of the forum, they still discuss about it. But what they discuss is the case itself. So it's not the prevention per se, it's the case also on what happening. I give you two example of the case that being discussed heavily here. The first, and this is the same part. So it's like a identification. What do you call it? Falsification. I add. So some people pretend to be someone. In one company, these people pretend to be the CEO, and he will email all of the employee to ask him, for example, hey, we need to buy iTunes gift card for this guest or for our partner or something like that. Can you buy it for me and something like that? And some people fall into it. And another story is that there is one company, a big company, that these people, the scammer is pretend to be the CFO of the company. He used the Gen AI to mimic the face. So he used like this for like a online meeting like this with the face of the CFO and the voice of the CFO. I don't know where he get it. And he asked to transfer some money to this account and account and account. So that's happening. So that is, yeah. How to prevent that? I I don't think that anyone know. There might be some theory on it, checking something like that, but I think it's still growing. The technology is still growing. The modus operandi of this camera is also growing. So yeah, that's it.
Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah, I might not be Brian at all. I might be using Gen AI right now, and no one will notice it. So yeah, that sounds really scary. And it's a wonderful insight as well when you mentioned the machine learning part. Like people should use machine learning when the patterns are really complex, right? But if the patterns like is very easy, maybe you just use rules because like what Adit says that it's very difficult to know what happens in the model, and you can't just turn it on and turn it off compared to rules where you can just being very flexible, right? So they're talking about the machine learning and Gen AI. What do you see the future of fraud preventions, right? Any technologies or strategies that we should be aware of?
Well, it depends on the size of your company, actually. Because, like, for me personally, um, using a battle-proven rule engine as a start is like it solves probably like 70-80% of your problems. So I mean, like using the most simple rule engine or any kind of like because like with rule engine you can just manually set the threshold parameters. Even if you have a dynamic threshold, like it's it's easier than having a machine learning model, do the iteration right. So, and it's a lot faster though. With AI, I think some of like the well-known companies that are actually deep diving into the space, they're actually developing anti-fraud systems for this AI. I mean, like even now, um, liveness checks with for KYC, for example, like they make sure that, oh yeah, this is not Gen AI, for example, but it's not 100% foolproof. But I mean, like it's a good start. Yeah, but for me, it's kind of like that.
Adit, do you want to chip in?
Can you repeat the question? I'll try to understand.
Like the future of fraud preventions, like any emerging technologies or strategy that we should be aware.
Mm, yeah, I think I second. I don't have any. Like, I mean, what Mas Bram said is, I think, overall. So rules start with simple and start looking at the problem first, and then decide on the solution. I think that if your company is like getting started and you started entering the fraud prevention, I think that's the best way instead of um like incorporating like these sophisticated tools, product, and so on. Just start simple. Can be like a SQL query on some rules or some SOP maybe. But yeah, I think that's the best method. So yeah.
Yeah. For the audience, if you have any questions, please type in the comments. For one of the last questions, if you could give one piece of advice to company right now looking to improve their fraud preventions, what would it be? Ram, yeah.
Well, if the company is still small, it's an early stage. I think putting aside a few, like investing in a robust, probably like no code tools would be beneficial. Because that way, like you eliminate the necessity of building out an engineering team or a developer team to actually build that out. Um, Hopefully, the tool is ready to be deployed out of the box, or even if it's not ready to deploy it out of the box, minimum integration effort that will be truly beneficial, because that way, like for example, I like to use rule engine as a start. For example, there's lots of rule engine provider out there, but there are probably a few that has no code capabilities, for example. uh, should be that too much of an investment, but obviously it'll save up time bandwidth for you. And with rule engines, you don't necessarily have to use it for fraud. Sometimes if you can get creative, you can use it also for promotion campaigns, because basically it's a rule engine, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like I think that's kind of like a small piece of advice that I would actually part with the audience here.
Yeah, use tools like Socrates, for example. So we are a no-code rules engine. You guys want to know more, can always just connect with me and we can chat. Adit, do you want to get your thought on it?
Yeah, I want to add that the fraud prevention is it's not how to say it. It's not a novel kind of thing. So someone who do it in the past, so the modus operandi will be the same. Maybe it's like fraud prevention or account takeover. It will be the same, and the solution for it might be the same. So it's better to like learn or to talk to someone who already do it or have a knowledge on it instead of like just figuring out it yourself, because it will always be kind of the same. Maybe it will be like different across the method, across the business and so on, but the area is still the same. So it's better to talk to someone that already do it and or have capability on it instead of just figuring out yourself, because you will, what they say, reinvent the wheel. Yeah, reinvent the wheel.
I see. So to summarize, I think use don't build it in-house if you don't have time and have the resource. And then start with rule engine, start with something simple. Don't go with machine learning, those complicated stuff. And then slowly, like start with the problem, not the solutions, right? What kind of problems that you're facing, and then try to fix it. It's really interesting insight. I think we talked from type of fraud to how to prevent it, how to balance, and until the machine learning part. So I will leave some time for the audience to ask any questions that they have. I saw some really familiar face. Aji, do you want to have any questions? Do you want to ask? If there's no questions, I think first of all, I want to thanks the time from Adit and Brock for all these speaker sessions. I hope these sessions is really useful for everyone, all the audience. And these sessions will be happen behind support from FastPass and Socrates as well. I'll give just 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes for Ario. Do you want to add something?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mas Brian, Mas Bram, Mas Adit, for the insightful talks. So I'm Aryo from FastPass. First of all, thank you very much for all the participants that attending today's webinar. Before we close the event, I want to introduce what FastPass is. FastPass is a multi-factor authentication solution service provider, or simply put, it's an e-commerce platform for companies that want to use OTP. So they don't need to engage with each providers anymore, who take up a lot of time. And when they don't perform, they have to repeat the steps from the beginning again and have to fulfill the contract until it's finished before they can switch to another provider. So for FastPass itself, the company only needs to integrate once, and you can use more than 50 providers that we have. But because our discussions is related to fraud and security, we also have a product called FastPass Seamless. The real aim of Seamless is to replace the OTP itself, and the big plan is to eliminate password with a solution that is more secure, easy to use, but also cost effective. So for companies that face several frauds, threats such as bot attacks, promo abuse, and then social engineering, spamming, phishing, and so on, you don't need to worry because we can detect all the anomalies on your user device. And Seamless also makes the verification process easier. So for example, if a user want to log in or want to make transactions, you don't need to use OTP anymore. Just submit the biometrics on your device. You can use Face ID, fingerprint, or anything that built in the user device, and the user will automatically log in easily without worrying about the device being unsafe. So for the conclusions, you don't need to create your own fraud preventions. You can use Socratek and FastPass for fraud preventions. Just use us. You can all have the security systems that you can find outside in FastPass and Socratek. And moreover, if you want to know more about FastPass, you can go directly to our website at fastpass.com, or click directly on the WhatsApp button on our websites to consult on problems with your authentication process. I think that's all for me. Get back to Pak Brian.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Aryo. I think conclusion is FastPass, call them. And for Socratek, we're the same. We no code rules engines. We try to help companies prevent online fraud. We understand that it's difficult. We're talking about like different type of fraud, like internal fraud, external fraud, the challenges of preventing it. Not everyone will need a fraud, like offenders fraud prevention solutions. We already talked what type of company will need it, in which stage. So if you use Socratek, that means that you basically have a rule engine, no code rule engines. That means that you don't really you can enable real time very quickly. I think Brown mentions that batch versus real time. When should you use real time? Socratek helps enable real time. Second part is that you can control the rules. Aditya also mentions that how important it is to be transparent and to have rules that you can turn on and turn off. We also try to enable that. That means that in the platform, you can create your own rules, you can turn it on and turn it off. Yes, so that's enough promotions. Any questions, please feel free. We have two experts here that can answer any questions that you want. Don't be shy, just put in all the questions or turn on your mic and ask the questions. Yes, and if there's no question, if there's no questions, we'll probably add it here. Aji, second time calling. Do you not have questions? Or Edwin, do you have questions, Win? Okay, cool. If you don't have any questions, that's it. Have a nice evening. Thank you for coming, and hopefully this webinar you learn a lot about fraud and how to prevent it. See you everyone. Cheers.
Cheers, folks.
See you all.